Welcome to Game Fondue Reviews. In this video, we're going to take a look at Colosseum. In Colosseum, players are operating their own Colosseum or gladiator-style arena in an effort to produce the biggest event of the game. Let's jump right in with a description of the rules, see a few example turns being played, then I'll be back for some closing remarks. This is Colosseum, set up for a 3-player game. To set up, each player picks a color and takes both ends of a Colosseum in their color and puts them on the indicated spaces. You can see based on the number of players, like if this was a 4-player game, the Colosseum would actually be here and not over here. But in a 3- or 5-player game, it starts here, and then players place their matching colored scoring marker on the start space of the scoring track. And also you give each player 30 coins, which they keep in their area. Then you take the event tokens with this back, shuffle them up, and put 3 face up on each of the market spaces in the center of the board. Then you're going to deal each player a hand, which they keep face up for all other players to see in their play area. In a 3-player game, each player gets 8 of these. In a 4-player game, each player gets 6. And in a 5-player game, each player gets 5. And if there's any extra in the case here, you just throw it out of the game, essentially. The rest of the tokens with the other back, the lion back, are just mixed into this bag here, and they're going to be used later during the game. Next, you're going to shuffle up events 1 to 5. You can tell the number of the event by the number up here, and deal 1 to each player. Any of the extras you can see here, 2 and 3, were not dealt out, are just going to be removed from the game. Then you're going to do the same thing with numbers 6 to 10. And again, numbers 8 and 9 were not included, but you can see each player will have 1 from each of the different sets. And these are face up as well for all other opponents to see. The rest of the events just form stacks for all players to be able to see. So here's 11 to 20, and here's 21 to 30. And you can see they can get bigger as the number increases. All the rest of the components essentially form supplies, money, emperor medals, season tickets, lodges, and so on. Then the emperor, councils, and senators are put out on the indicated spaces, matching their color on the board. Lastly, the player immediately clockwise to the emperor is going to be the first player, which is going to be the blue player here. And we're ready to start the game. The game consists of 5 turns made up of 5 phases, which are investing, acquiring assets, trading assets, producing events, and closing ceremonies. At the end of the 5th round, the player who has produced the single biggest event is going to be the winner. All game phases begin with the start player and then proceed clockwise before the next phase begins. And the first phase of the round is investing, and each player can make 1 investment. There's a few different choices, which are buy a new event, expand your arena, purchase season tickets, or construct a lodge. If you're buying a new event program, you just pay the cost of it, which you can see here, like this one's cost would be 13, then you just put it face up in front of you. You can buy any of these, they don't have to be bought in any kind of order, and you have a player aid, which describes to you in more detail what the different ones are, so you don't have to constantly look through the piles. I also want to point out that when buying an event, the rulebook says you have to purchase a higher numbered event than the one you just produced. However, later in a fact, the designer disregarded that statement, so play it as you will. The next type of investment you can make is to expand your arena, and this always costs 10 coins. You just pay 10 coins to the bank and you can expand in either direction, and you just do that by putting the matching colored arena space in between them, and you can expand up to 2 times. Every arena can be a maximum size of 4. You can always choose which way to expand, either left or right. Next is purchasing season tickets, and it works the same way. You just pay 10 coins to the bank and you put season tickets in your stadium. You can buy any number of season tickets over the course of the game, but like all other investments, only 1 can be purchased in a round, even of the same type. And lastly is constructing the Emperor's Lodge. This is a little bit cheaper. You just pay 5 coins to the bank, and the cost is there on that side. And what that does is later in the game, you'll get to roll 2 dice instead of 1. As has been stated, you can normally only invest in 1 thing. However, if you have 2 Emperor medals, you see here it says ×2, you can discard them to perform an additional investment in a turn. And that can be the same type of investment or a different type. There's also some special tokens in the bag that will give you a similar option. But generally speaking, 1 investment per turn. The next phase is acquiring event asset tokens. And there's 2 ways to do this. There's the original rulebook way, and there's an official variant provided by the designer's way. We'll talk about both briefly. Like all other phases, it begins with the start player and proceeds clockwise. When it's your turn, you can pick a group of event tokens in the market spaces here, and you can bid on them. The lowest starting bid you can make is 8 coins, so if you pick it, you have to bid at least 8. You can certainly bid higher. Then it's just going to go clockwise around the table, and players are either going to bid higher or pass. Once a player passes, they cannot rejoin, and whenever all players but 1 have passed, that player has essentially bought the group. They pay the amount of money to their bid to the bank, and they take all 3 of those tiles. If the winning bidder is not the person that picked the group, meaning not that person's turn, then that player can pick another group. However, these will not be refilled, so it's possible that all but 1 of them are left during a player's turn. Instead of picking a group, they may also pass, in which case they would now be refilled because it's the next player in clockwise order's turn to pick a group. However, if the person who did pick the group is the winning bid, then once again it's going to be refilled and the next player clockwise is going to pick the group. In the original rules of the game, per this phase, for the entire phase, each player can only buy 1 group. So let's pretend this player picked this group, but the green player bought it. So then this player can pick again or pass. Let's say he picks again and he himself buys this group. At this time, these would be refilled, but the green player will never get to pick a group. It just goes right to the red player's turn because he's already purchased one for the turn. However, in the variant rules, each player is allowed to buy one group per player picking. So in the same example, if blue picked this group and green bought it in the variant, green can no longer bid on anything blue picks, but green will still have their own turn and can still bid on things himself or red picks. So then in both cases, it would work pretty similarly, but that's the major difference, is buying things once per player versus buying things once per phase maximum. After all players have had a chance to buy a group, we move on to the trading event asset tokens phase, and then in turn order, players can trade with the active player, and trading includes exchanging, buying, and selling these tokens here. You can't trade future promises or anything like that. It's also important to note that once a token is traded, it cannot be traded again that phase. So for example, if the blue player decides to trade with this guy here, when it's the green player's turn, he cannot retrade this token to a different player. So that's just something to watch out for there, but otherwise, this is just a trading phase, and it's very possible that no trades actually occur in this phase. After trading is the producing an event phase, and this is composed of 3 phases itself, which are moving nobles, producing event, and counting the spectators. During the moving nobles phase, you roll 1 die. If you have a Loge in your arena, you're actually going to roll 2 die, but for our purposes now, we're going to roll 1. You're going to move one of these figures that many spaces. So in this case, it can be the yellow, the blue, the red, anywhere on the board, it doesn't matter, but you're going to move them exactly 4, and they always move clockwise. If you had a Loge and you rolled a second die, this is actually 1 to 3, so you choose to move something 1, 2, or 3, but again, always clockwise. You can either move 1 guy 5 to 7 spaces, or you can move 1 guy 4 and 1 guy 1 to 3. You have to fully combine them or do them separately. It's possible for multiple nobles to share 1 space, so that's totally okay. But if a noble ever ends his movement on one of these spaces, doesn't necessarily have to be the one that matches him, you're going to get an Emperor medal at that time. And Emperor medals do a few different things during the game. We already talked about the additional action. But during this phase, after you complete moving the nobles, you can also return an Emperor medal to the supply to move a guy 1 to 3 spaces in either direction. And that's the only way that you could potentially move somebody back the opposite way. But that's just something to be mindful of there. Also, if you have 2 dice, because you have a Loge, and you move somebody, it must be their final move there. So for instance, this guy couldn't first go 1, 2, 3, 4, you get the medal, and then you move another 3. He would have to absolutely finish his movement on that space for you to get the medal. When you're done moving nobles, you're going to pick one of your events to actually produce for this turn, and you're going to put the associated tokens with it to see how many points you get. So for instance, if this guy wanted to produce this one, we see that it requires 2 red and 1 green thing. He only has 1 red and 1 green thing. So you look at the bottom here, his -1, he's only going to get 5 points. If he had them all, he would have got 7 points. But in this case, he would get 5 points, and we know that. It's also possible to produce an event you've already produced on an earlier turn by turning it back face up, but you're going to lose some bonus points, which we'll talk about in a second. And that brings us to the final part of this produce an event phase, which is totaling your points. So let's say this guy here had 5 because he was missing 1 of the 3. He only had 2 of them, so we know he gets 5. Then you're going to get 5 extra points for every event you've already produced. Since in this example, it's the first turn of the game, he hasn't already produced any events. And then you're going to get 5 for each season ticket you have. So if you have a season ticket in your area, you're going to get 5 more. Then you get 4 for each star performer that you used. We're going to talk about star performers in a minute, but you actually have to use them. So in this example, he's only using red and green. If he had a white star performer, he would not get those +4. And then you get 7 extra points if the Emperor is in your arena. You get 5 extra points if a council is in your arena. And you get 3 extra points for each senator that's in your arena. Podiums, if you have those, are 3 points each. And you can also turn in Emperor medals at this time to get 3 points for each of them, which is shown there. So there's a lot of ways to get points, and if your total points is higher than any total you've ever had before, you move your marker up. You only record your absolute highest score for a round in this game, so if it's lower than or equal to a score you've already had, you're not going to move your marker. But in all cases, you take that many coins from the bank. So if my total ended up being 15 points on that event, I would move up to 15 because I'm currently below it, and I would get 15 coins. If later I got 14 on an event, I wouldn't move because I've already gotten 15, but I would still get 14 more coins. So after the first player produces their event, the next player would go, starting with moving the nobles, and then they would produce their event until everybody's done it. Once everybody's done it, we reach the closing ceremonies part of the turn, and at this time, the player with the highest score not necessarily the highest score this round, but just the highest score ever, takes a podium, and in the future that's going to be 3 points each. But after that, each player has to discard one of their tokens that they did use during that phase. So in this case, he can either discard the red or the green because those are the ones he actually used, and all other players would do this as well. And finally, the player in last place gets to take any token they would like, except for the special tokens from the player in first place. There's 3 special tokens that the player in last place could not steal. This is the Joker, which is essentially a wild, and you can use it as whatever you'd like while doing an event. Next is the Emperor token. If you ever get one of these, you immediately just discard it and take an Emperor medal from the supply. And there's also the additional action token, which you can discard to take an additional investment during the investment phase, or you can exchange it for an Emperor medal as well. The only other things to touch on are Star Performers and Emperor medals. Star Performers, you get them during the game if you ever have 3 or more of that type and you have the most. There's one for each different event token in the game. You can see here that this player already has 3 red, but so does this guy. So no single player alone has the most, so nobody's going to get this. But if any time one of these guys goes up to 4 and the other guy doesn't, they'd immediately take this. But it's also possible that as you discard tiles during the game, you go below 3. If no player is above 3, they're going to lose this as well. You have to have at least 3, and you have to be the most to have all of these. And if you use them, they're +4 during scoring. And the Emperor medals can be used in several different ways. The way you get them is with some of the special tokens or by landing on these spaces. You can exchange them at any time for 6 money. You can use them for 3 bonus points when scoring an event. You can discard 2 to take an extra investment, or you can use them after you're done moving to move a guy 1 to 3 spaces in either direction. Again, that's the only way you could potentially move backward. It's also important to note, if you move a noble with an Emperor medal, you cannot gain another Emperor medal from that move. Another thing that's interesting to note about these is they are limited. So if you were to get a medal and this pile was empty, you actually do not get one. However, whenever anybody uses one, they go back in this pile, so that's unlikely. The game ends after the 5th round, and whichever player has the single biggest point total is going to be the winner. Let's get going with this example playthrough. So this player is the start player because he's immediately clockwise to the Emperor, and he's going to go first in the investment phase. He's going to pay 10 bucks, and he's immediately going to make his arena bigger. He decides to push it that way, and he does it like so. So now it's the green player's turn. He can take any one investment. He decides he's going to get some season tickets, which also cost $10, so he's going to put the season tickets in his area. And the red player, just to be a little bit different than the other guys, is only going to pay 5, and he's going to get an Emperor Lodge, which will allow him to roll an extra dice when moving the nobles. So we move on to the acquiring event asset tokens phase. So again, this guy's going to go first, and he's going to pick a group that he would like to get. He definitely wants to get some red guys, so he's going to pick this group here, and he's going to start with the minimum bid of 8. This guy over here would also like that, so he's actually going to go up to 9. And this guy over here passes, so he can never re-enter this bid. This guy goes 10, and this guy is going to pass. So since he's the last player left, he pays his money to the bank, and he's going to get this whole group. Since he was the player that picked the group, we are going to refill from this bag here. And now it's this player's turn to pick a group. Up to this point, the variant versus the original rules hasn't mattered. But now it's this player's turn, and it would matter. We'll just describe the difference here. Since this player is now picking, in the original rules, this guy already bought a group, so he cannot buy another group this whole phase. But in the variant rules, since this person is now picking, he would be able to bid because he can buy once per picker. Just for speed reasons, we're going to go through it without allowing him to bid. So it's just between the red and the green player here. So this player decides that he would like to bid on this group here. So he starts the bid with 8. And this guy says, I'm not interested in that. So this guy wins the bid for 8. So he immediately pays his 8 to the bank, and he takes that group. Now, once again, since the player who started the bid won it, we're going to refill. However, in this case, he now has 4, and this guy has 3 of these red guys, which is more than 3. So he's going to take that star performer. So if he ever uses them, he's going to get 4 bonus points. And once again, we're going to refill the group. And finally, the red player is going to go. And he wants to get these boats over here, and since he's the only one left, no one else can bid in the original rules. In the variant rules, both of these players would be able to bid since he's a new picker. He's going to pay 8, and he's going to get that for himself here. Now, once again, that will be refilled. Now, he's tied him in number, but he already has it, so in order to get it, he would have to surpass him. So he's going to keep the star performer here. But once again, we're going to refill these, but we're moving on to the trading phase. So now, starting with the start player, players can make offers to trade with others. He could say, I'll give you this for 5 money to this guy, and that guy is a little bit interested because that would give him a start performer. So he actually says, you know what, I'll do that. So he gives 5 money to this guy, and he's going to take this along with the corresponding star performer. And then this guy says, you know what, I'm done trading. So now this guy has an opportunity to make trades with the other players. You can only ever trade with the active player. And after he finishes making trades, the red player is going to take a turn making trades as well. We're going to jump ahead to the produce an event phase so you can see what happens there. Now we are at the produce an event phase. This guy goes first. He does not have an Emperor Lodge, so he's going to roll 1 die. And he got a 6, so he's going to move somebody 6. He decides he's going to move the Emperor here. Since the Emperor ended on this space, he's going to get an Emperor medal. And then he is done with that part, so he's going to pick which of these he's going to do. He's just going to do this real easy one here. And he has all of the pieces for it, so he gets the full value of 7 points. But then he gets points for other things, such as having already done events and having star performers. Unfortunately for him, he doesn't have any of those things yet, so he's just going to get 7 points. So we move blue up to 7 because that's his new highest, and he takes that many coins from the bank. So he takes 7 coins from the bank, and we're just going to put this one in his area here with these on it, so we remember that that's what he did. So now it's the blue guy's turn. He also does not have an Emperor Lodge, so he's going to roll, and he's going to run this guy right through the other guy's area, which is a little bit mean, but he's also going to get one of these in the process. So then he decides he wants to get as many points as possible right away, so he's going to move this guy into his area using this, and he's just going to put it right back. Then he decides to do this event. He has all of the needed red and the blue and the green here, so the max total you can get for this one is 11. So that's what he gets. He gets 11. Plus, he's used this star performer. He has this one, but he didn't actually use it, but he did use these red guys in here, so that's another 4, so that's 15. Plus his 5 for his season tickets is 21. Plus his 3 for his senator is 24. So he's got 24 points there, and obviously that's his highest total of the game so far. So he goes up to there and he takes 24 coins from the bank. And finally, the last player is going to get to do the same thing, except he does have an Emperor Lodge. So he's going to roll 2 dice at this time, and he got a 3 and a 2. So he can move one guy 5, or he can move somebody 3 and somebody else 2. He's going to move this guy 3 and this guy 2. And now he's going to produce his event just like the other 2 players just did. We'll jump ahead to the closing ceremonies phase to take a look at what happens there. We're now at the closing ceremonies phase. During the closing ceremonies, we clearly see that the green player is the most, so the green player is going to earn a podium. All of these completed events are going to be flipped face down because in the future they're going to be worth 5 points each, provided you don't reproduce the same event. If you choose to reproduce the same event, it comes back face up. And then every player has to discard one of their tokens that they used to complete that particular event. This guy is going to go ahead and get rid of one of his red guys, so they're just totally out of the game there. And the other players will do the same. I want to note that the red player claims the red star performer because he now has the most red event tokens. And then all of these are, of course, flipped over. And then the player with the lowest score, which is the blue player, gets to take one of the tokens from the player with the most. He decides he's going to go ahead and take this horse. So he just takes the horse outright, and that's the end of the turn. So then the start player marker is going to move. This is going to come down, and we're going to repeat the same 5 steps. We'll jump ahead a little bit later in the game so you can see some more interesting situations. Welcome back to the producing event phase in the 5th and final round of the game. This player is the first player, and he just rolled the die. He got a 5. So he's going to go ahead and move the Emperor. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then he's going to discard or return his Emperor medal to move this guy 3 spaces. 1 to 3 there. And even though he ends on this space, he doesn't get another Emperor medal. So this is the event that he's going to do. And I also want to point out that you cannot produce these events unless you have an arena of a certain size. The really large ones here require an arena of size 4, and these ones require an arena of at least size 3. So that's something to keep in mind. But anyway, he's missing 1 boat here, but he does have the rest, and -1 is still worth 40 points, which is a whole lot of points. And he also is a star performer in each of these 3, so that's going to be an additional 12 points, 4 for each star performer, so that's 52 points right there. For each event you've previously produced, that's another 5, so that we go from 52 to 62 to 67. And then each season ticket is another 5. He has 1 of them, so that's 72. And then he has 1 podium from being first place on an earlier round, so that's 75. His Emperor is worth 7, so that's 82. And his Council is worth another 5, so that's 87 points. We can see that his previous highest was 40, so now he's going to go ahead and move up to that new total of 87. and that's going to be his score for the game. The other players are going to perform this round exactly the same way, and whoever has the highest single event total at the end of this round is going to be the winner. Colosseum's a really interesting game with a pretty neat theme. There's not a lot of games where you get to run your own Colosseum, so to speak, but in this one you do. I also think it's really unique and interesting how only your largest score counts, because that's not something you see in a lot of games, though all the points in the game and things that you accomplish earlier in the game do tend to add to your big score at the end. But it's all about that final score typically, and whoever gets that biggest final show is usually the winner. I find the game much more dynamic with the variant bidding patterns in the event token phase, but it does add time to the game, so people who are just starting might want to just forego that just to understand how the game works and things like that. But I tend to introduce it to new players, especially if it's a lower player count. I feel like it's almost necessary just to keep that phase interesting and dynamic. But altogether, it's a really cool game. It has some really unique aspects, and it's basically just set collection and kind of matching things out. But at the same time, there's sort of that balance you have to have between having the biggest show each round, because you'll get a podium, which is worth +3 later, but you also lose a token to somebody else, which can really hurt you along the way. So this one look fun to you? Check it out. That's Colosseum.